Coming is the annual Resident Rights and Abuse Prevention and Reporting in Service. Who has never heard me give this before? 2 people. Okay. I apologize to you in advance because I'm gonna breeze through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. So feel free to ask questions or come and see me after, because everybody's heard this before. And there's a couple of new things I want to really emphasize. I have a little film to show. It's about a 20-minute clip. I just got it this week from the Department of Health that focuses on resident-to-resident abuse. That's pretty interesting. And instead of listening to me the whole time, you can watch a film. But it gives 3 different scenarios to observe, and maybe the wrong way to intervene and maybe a better way to intervene, so it might be useful. The other part is I want to really emphasize the Elder Justice Act and our new requirement, which was last year, but just to refresh everybody, because we have to go over that again every year. Our obligation as employees to report any crime that you see committed upon a resident in a nursing home to the authorities, meaning law enforcement authorities. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And so I'm going to breeze through this first part, but you've seen many, many, many times before. I think I am. This is from the federal regulations for nursing homes. Resident has the right, this is one of the resident rights, has a right to be free from verbal, sexual, physical, and mental abuse, corporal punishment, and involuntary seclusion. That's the main statement of resident rights. Abuse, we'll go through these really quickly. It means the willful infliction of injury, confinement, intimidation, punishment with the resulting physical harm, pain, or mental anguish. Remember, federal says willful. New York State doesn't use that word willful. Verbal abuse. Use of oral, written, gestured language that willfully again, includes disparaging, derogatory terms to residents or their families, and this is important, or within their hearing. So if you are having a little altercation with a coworker and using some foul or aggressive language and a resident hears it, verbal abuse within their hearing, because they might hear that, misunderstand that, and think that that's a threat to themselves and be afraid. So we can't do that. Okay. Sexual abuse speaks for itself. Sexual harassment, sexual coercion, sexual assault. Physical abuse, hitting, slapping, pinching, kicking, and any other kind of behavior with corporal punishment. Mental abuse, humiliation, harassment, threats of punishment, or deprivation. Involuntary seclusion, separating a resident from other residents, putting them in their room against their will, or keeping them out of the room against their will. Okay? Neglect. Failure to provide goods and services necessary to avoid physical harm, mental anguish, or mental illness. Now we all know the usual image we have of neglect in nursing homes, right? People laying in nastiness, having bed sores, being neglected, just laying there all day, nobody paying attention to it. But in New York State, neglect takes on a special meaning because of a thing called failure to follow the care plan. They consider that neglect. So we take failure to follow the care plan very seriously here. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Misappropriation of property, deliberate misplacement, exploitation, wrongful, temporary, or permanent use of residents' belongings or money without their consent. Even borrowing stuff without their consent is misappropriation of property. Okay, so We have to have policies, which we do. Everybody know where the policies on abuse are located? Nobody? There's a gray book. It's usually, I think, called the HR book in every office and probably in every department. Is that what it's called, the HR book? Or the administrative?
Policy manual. Covers everything.
No, it doesn't. But it covers lots of things, mostly HR stuff. But there's an abuse policy in there, and the nursing department has the same policy. So it's in either the nursing notebook or this gray binder that has a lot of policies. Our policies have to have 7 components. Screening, remember what screening is? Betsy does all that. Criminal background checks, fingerprinting, reference checks, things like that. Training, that's what we're doing. That's what you do at orientation. Somebody goes over it, and that's what this is every year. Prevention, this is part of prevention, but really being aware of what's going on around and trying to make sure that maybe people who are showing some signs of stress or whatever are given a little break. Trading units perhaps. Identification is how do we identify when abuse has occurred. Investigation, spend a lot of time doing that whenever somebody does report it. Protection, protecting the residents from any further abuse. And reporting and our response. So if there's one thing you take away from this, 2 things. What happens? What's the first thing you do if you come upon a situation that looks or feels like or sounds like abuse to you? Nope. What's the first thing you do? Intervene. Stop it. Stop it. Put a stop to it. Intervene. Can I help you? Is there something wrong here? Do something. Can I take you over here? Can I help you with something? Intervention. And then what's the second thing? And whom do we report to? 2 people. Who are they? What supervisor? The nursing supervisor, not your department supervisor, but the nursing supervisor. Every shift, every day, there is a house supervisor. If you don't know who it is, call the reception desk. Say, who's the supervisor today? Can you page the supervisor for me? And whatever. So you locate the supervisor. And who else? You. The administrator. 2 people. Why do we need 2 people? Yeah, I always like to say we're pretty nice around these parts, mostly. And a lot of times abusive situations might be a little shade of gray. I thought I heard a slap, for example, when I was going by so-and-so's room. And they're sort of iffy about it. Not always, but a lot of times that's really what a lot of these things are. And so why do we tell 2 people? Because the supervisor may be dealing with somebody dying, somebody having a crisis at the moment, that somebody fell, they're dealing with juggling 5 or 10 different things at once, and so that may not go to the top of their list on any given day. And that's why you call the administrator. Just so, and you can call them together, especially at 3 in the morning. Can we call you talk to the supervisor and say, how about we call Jeff right now together so that he knows about it? Okay? So, all right. I'm going to skip through these things. This is about the screening, reporting. There's the law that says must be reported immediately to the administrator of the facility. Okay. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. There's this weird thing called injuries of unknown source. Anytime a resident has a bruise or a scratch or a skin tear that we don't know about, we have to investigate it and try to at least speculate. Well, how did they get this? Usually we know they banged it on this, or they were aggressive when you're giving care and they're hitting things and hitting their own bed bed and their own furniture and stuff. That can happen. So we need to know what happened and try to figure out ways to protect them in the future. This definition is the definition used for the administrator, me, to I'm probably making all kinds of noise in this thing if I touch this, right? Sorry. Sorry, people. Reasonable cause. After we investigate and we find out that there is reasonable cause to believe abuse has occurred, then I have an obligation to report it. Okay, resident to resident. I'll show the film here in a second. Both things have to be must happen to be reported, one or the other. A resident who hits or strikes or is aggressive to another resident and causes harm of any form, little scratch, little bruise, has to be reported to the Department of Health. If there's no harm, a resident who is repeatedly doing that, he whacks on this person, he whacks on that person, he whacks on this person, he whacks on that person. If we aren't showing any kind of evidence of doing something about that, getting a psychiatric eval, maybe changing their meds, maybe making sure we separate them or don't put them in the same activity together where they might encounter, then we need to report that to the Department of Health. So repeated resident-to-resident abuse. And then I talked earlier about failure to follow the care plan. Same thing, same kind of idea. Anytime a resident is harmed because of a failure to follow the care plan, I have to report it to the Department of Health. Anytime an employee repeatedly fails to follow the care plan, I have to report it to the Department of Health. We've had this happen once where there was never harm, never even an incident. No fall, no bruise, no nothing. But it was reported that somebody failed to follow the care plan. They somehow got out of their wheelchair into the bed and they didn't follow the care plan to use 2 people or a lift. And somebody wonders, well, how'd they get into bed? Well, I put them into bed. Failure to follow the care plan. That's 1. Something similar happens again. That's 2. Something similar happens again. That's 3. No event. I mean, I really shocked the Department of Health with that one. Because I called them up and, well, do you think abuse has occurred? Well, no. It was not even an incident. But they failed to follow the care plan repeatedly. Required to report it. And we terminated the employee because it fit within our policy, which follows. This is our updated policy. I think it was 2010. If there's no harm in any of these repeated failure to follow the care plans, this is the course that happens. First offense, 1-day suspension without pay. Second offense, 2-day, and 3 strikes, you're out. Failure to follow the care plan repeatedly. If there's harm, first offense, suspension without pay. Length of time can be 1, 2, or 3 days, and second offense is termination. It's a very serious thing to not follow the care plan, and I really stress that with everybody. And if you think, again, unit managers are just like all of us, we're just people, and sometimes we might write a care plan that's a little hard to follow. Talk to them. Say, this is impossible. They do their very best to make sure that nobody's getting set up for having a hard time following the care plan. So please, communicate if you think something could be done differently or written up differently. I mean, the policy we had before kind of seemed to go on endlessly. If you had a failure to follow the care plan 10 years ago, and then you failed to follow the care plan again yesterday, is that repeated failure to follow the care plan? It was 10 years ago when you were just new and made mistakes. So we changed it to be a 24-month look back. If you've been doing a good job and you've not had a failure to follow the care plan, when does it become repeated again? It's kind of like a new track record after 2 years. But if you do it twice in 2 consecutive 2-year periods, now we're sort of falling into the category of repeated. Okay. So, key elements, if you see abuse, intervene and stop it. And report it immediately. There's the hotline number that's posted throughout the building. Anytime you need to make a call. And I will stress, licensed people, nurses, even pharmacists has a license. You have an obligation to report abuse yourself, okay, to the Department of Health. So again, our policy prefers that you tell the supervisor and tell me, and then we can call the Department of Health together if we need to, or at least I need to notify you by a memo, written notification. That's the only way it relieves your obligation to report, is if I've said, we took care of it. We reported it, or we didn't report it because of X, Y, or Z. Didn't think we had evidence, or it didn't read, and based on our investigation, didn't meet the reasonable cause standard. We notify you of that, then it's your judgment. Do I accept that or not accept that? If you still don't feel right about it, by all means, report it. And then they'll come and investigate and see if we made the right decision to not report it or not. Okay? Retaliation is also a violation of law. So if you ever are retaliated against by anyone, let us know. And we'll call law enforcement on that, because if there's retaliation allowed, then nobody's going to report. Right? Okay, resident rights. I'm going to breeze through these real quick, just in terms of a list. The resident rights with more detail, like it's a paragraph, right, about each one, are posted throughout the building. So again, I don't want to go through every single one other than to mention them. Exercise of rights. What does that mean, exercise rights? For example, we all have a right to vote, right? So our residents need to be able to exercise their right to vote as well. In fact, the voting people were here last week and had residents who wanted to vote could come, and they voted in the conference room. Protection of resident funds, that their money is safe. They have a right to choose their personal physician. They have a right to privacy and confidentiality. They have a right to air grievances. They can look at survey results, which, by the way, all of you can too. They're in a little red book up at the reception desk. I don't know why I just said work. I guess they have a right to work. They can work. If they work for us, we got to pay them. Now you know that we have a group of residents who are straightening out the washcloths. Does that work? Not for them. It's really quite fun and enjoyable and social, and it's part of their care plan. Something they feel very productive, particularly up on East Wing. Part of their day-to-day thing. It's sometimes after they lay them out, we mess them up again to have something to do. So it's not like they're doing somebody's job for them. Mail. They have a right to receive their mail unopened. They have a right to have people visit them, and the right to say, I don't want these people to visit me, even their own relatives. They have that right. They have a right to their own personal property. Is that what that means? Bring your own stuff in, within reason. Got to fit in the room. Married couples have a right to reside together in the same room or not. They don't have to if they don't want to. After 58 years of being together, I want my own room. They can self-administer drugs, but of course they'd have to be able to really do it and prove that they can do it, and we'd have to make sure the drugs were safe from all the other residents. I don't think that hardly ever happens, and I don't know that anybody's ever asked for that. They have a right to refuse certain transfers. That mainly means out of here, not from room to room. They have a right to, there's certain admission, transfer, and discharge rights, and they have a right to equal access to quality care, no matter who's paying for it. Medicare, Medicaid, private pay, insurance covered. None of you know that really, and you shouldn't know that. Everybody gets treated equally. They have a right to be free from restraint. And I don't know, do we have anybody in a restraint at this point? I don't think we do. It's been years that I can remember any of that. There's the right to be free from abuse. They have a right to a quality of life and a degree of dignity. And most importantly, a right to self-determination and participation. And that's why we emphasize a lot, especially with culture change and resident-centered care. We want to encourage them to continue to make choices that they can make. Give them opportunities to make choices, because so much has been taken away from them, and it would be nice to be able to still make some decisions for themselves. They have a right to participate in resident and family groups. We have resident council. We have family council. They have a right to participate in other activities. And then there's this other thing called accommodation of needs. Does anybody know what that means? Do you know what that means? The expert on resident rights.
I assume that we just have to make any accommodation for any need that they have.
Well, yes, and I guess the example I use, typically it's kind of like an equipment need, mostly. I observed a resident in the last weekend I was in having trouble with his food, using a spoon on a flat plate. He would try to scoop stuff up, it'd come all over, spill all over him. And to accommodate his needs, we should be providing some sort of a special plate or a plate guard that he can scoop up against and be able to get the food to stay on his spoon instead of on his clothing. So that's like one example. Okay, I'm going to show this film, and let's hope it works. Let me see if I know how to do it. I'm going to shut this.
Hello, I'm Charles Osgood. The number of Americans aged 65 and older is rising rapidly. Of this group, people 80 and above make up the largest increase. As America ages, there's a greater need for long-term care. So now, more than ever before, it's important to help long-term care facilities provide safe, quality care and to create systems that protect against all forms of elder mistreatment. The federal government has a system for monitoring care, and most states have laws that require long-term care settings to report elder mistreatment. However, little is known about one serious and potentially dangerous type of abusive behavior: resident-to-resident mistreatment. Resident-to-resident mistreatment is defined as negative and aggressive physical, sexual, or verbal interactions between residents in long-term care settings that would likely be considered unwelcome. These interactions often result in physical or psychological distress in the person being mistreated. The definition of resident-to-resident mistreatment covers a range of actions, from invasion of privacy to physical violence. Generally speaking, there are many causes of elder mistreatment, but resident-to-resident mistreatment may be linked to illnesses that affect memory and the ability to reason and control one's behavior. Some residents may not even be aware that their actions are abusive. Furthermore, residents who have witnessed or experienced resident-to-resident mistreatment may feel powerless to do anything about it. If facilities do not have policies and procedures in place, or if they fail to take action, residents may feel that they have to tolerate such mistreatment because there's no established mode of recourse. This video has been made to raise your awareness of resident-to-resident mistreatment and to help you to take action so that these behaviors are avoided and their impact is lessened. Over the next few minutes, we're going to show you 3 different vignettes portraying various forms of resident-to-resident elder mistreatment. In each case, we'll present an abusive situation, followed by different ways of handling that situation. After each case, you'll meet researchers and clinicians, all experts in their field, who are dedicated to the prevention and elimination of all forms of elder mistreatment. By watching the video carefully, we hope that you'll learn more about how to prevent resident-to-resident mistreatment.
Oh, sorry, this seat is saved for Ruth.
Why don't you try that table over there? There's plenty of other empty seats. I already sat down, and I don't want to get up and move again.
Why is Joseph here? Where's Ruth going to sit tonight?
He just sat down in Ruth's seat, and he won't move.
I'm right here, and I can hear you talking about me.
Well, if you can hear, then why don't you just listen and move so we can be with our friends?
This is a free country, and I can sit where I want. Friends or no friends, I'm staying.
Why are you being so stubborn? Ruth sits in this seat every night for dinner. For God's sakes, just move.
Come on now, knock it off. I just want to enjoy dinner.
I told you I'm not moving. Why don't you move?
Harry, are you okay?
Yes, yes, I'm fine.
Okay, good. Sit. Okay. Joseph, please come with me. Why don't you sit at this table right here? Harry, are you okay?
Yes, yes, I'm fine.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have a nurse come take a look at you just to be sure. Nurse! No. Oh, can you take a look at Harry? I think he was pushed to the floor and bumped his head.
Hi, Harry. Are you in any pain?
No, but my head hurts a little bit.
In this situation, the safety of the resident who fell is the first concern. One needs to use the same good clinical judgment that one would use when a patient is injured in a long-term care facility in any way. So in this case, the individual should not be moved. The individual, to the greatest extent possible, should be evaluated on site to look for problems with mobility and thinking. It may be that other residents in the dining room or a common area need to be moved to protect the privacy of that individual. Whenever possible, if it's safe, in the opinion of those rendering care, it's preferable that the person be moved to a more private area or their own room. It's critically important to monitor the victim, not only right after the injury, but for several hours afterwards, especially in the case of a head injury, where sometimes symptoms can appear many hours after what you thought might have been a minor injury. And often it's advisable to get the patient's physician involved to let them know what's going on. In addition to the follow-up of the actual injuries, it's important to have a plan to try and figure out how to prevent episodes of resident-to-resident elder mistreatment between these two individuals in the future.
Documentation in these events is essential, and one shouldn't decide that it's not important because a person wasn't overtly injured. It's important not only to make sure that it's entered into the record so that other people in the institution know that this has taken place so that they can be aware of and vigilant to make sure it doesn't happen again, but also in order to make sure there's a baseline of understanding whether or not there will be symptoms later. If someone hits their head, they may be fine in the short term, but they may develop a blood clot in their brain, for example, later on. And so it'd be important to know that. It's also important to document it because it's a responsibility of the staff to do that out of respect for the patient and in line with what the law requires.
Administrators and staff have an absolute legal responsibility to assure the safety of our residents. And resident-to-resident abuse falls directly and squarely under the heading of safety. And so we as a facility, and every facility that's licensed in New York and around the country, has an absolute requirement under federal and state law to assure the safety of our residents. Any nursing facility that encounters resident-to-resident abuse, whether it's psychological, verbal, or physical, has an absolute obligation to, first of all, intervene, secondly, investigate the incident, and third, determine whether it arises to a reportable incident. And that distinction requires the good faith judgment of the staff and an understanding of the degree of the interaction.
When evaluating episodes of resident-to-resident elder mistreatment, certainly the highest priority is the safety of the victim in the moments just after the episode has occurred. But we should also be thinking about the aggressor and the evaluation of his or her medical condition. In many ways, it's unfair often to think of that individual as a perpetrator because it might be underlying neurologic problems like Alzheimer's disease or other dementias that are responsible for that behavior. Often those individuals have worsening of their behaviors when an underlying medical problem comes about, a urinary tract infection, a pneumonia, a drug interaction. And often the only manifestation of those problems is a change in behavior. So it's important that we think about this in a medical context.
You know Carver Line on Water Street?
Hi, bingo will be starting in 5 minutes in the activity room.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I feel a lot better knowing you're there. Just stay out of sight. No matter what happens, we don't want...
At the very beginning of embryogenesis, because we go
Hey,
through cells that
we
are...
were watching a movie. Yeah, would you please turn the channel back?
You can't come in here and change the channel. We've been watching this movie from the beginning.
Bingo's in 5 minutes. You're not going to see the end anyway.
If you're not going to change the channel back, leave. I'm just going to go ahead and call the nurse.
You don't make the rules. You've been watching all day.
I'm going to call the nurse to make you turn the movie back on.
Don't call the nurse.
So change the channel and calm down.
Oh, shut up. Who gave you the right to tell me what to do?
Jake, you can't talk to us like that.
Nurse!
Stop yelling for the nurse, or else...
Or else what, Jake? You going to hit us with your cane?
Come on, let's all go to bingo. Come on. Let's go to bingo. It's all right. Come on. It's okay. Let's go to bingo. It's all right. Susan, could you please come to the activities area? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Jake. Why don't we go somewhere quiet so we can talk about this?
I don't want to go anywhere. I want to watch TV.
Okay, well, what type of program would you like to watch? I can help you look for another TV because this one is already in use.
No, I'm already here.
Come on. I'll help you get up and we can find another TV in a more quiet area.
Oh, all right.
Rather than escalate Jake's already very evident anger, the social worker intervened and diffused the situation by addressing his needs directly in removing him from the room. And that was the critical factor in not causing a greater altercation, a greater verbal confrontation, and possibly even something that would escalate to a physical confrontation. Diffusing situations really means taking a step back and in the moment looking at the dynamic from each and every resident's position, from their vantage. It's most important to do what's in the best interest of everyone involved, and that usually is to take the one individual who is in the throes of the greatest upset and try to address his or her needs and or help to escort him or her from the actual scene. It's imperative to remain neutral, to look at the rights and the needs and the welfare of everyone involved, not make automatic assumptions, not automatically label someone as the victim and someone as the aggressor or the perpetrator. Truth be known, for each and every resident, the experience is a reflection of who they are, what they struggle with, where they are at any given point in time. And as I said, with variables like age and illness and compound losses, loss upon loss upon loss in someone's life, the emotional energy that's required to make it through a day is extraordinary.
And staff have to be the lifeline for residents. We have to remember that we are there to help them meet their needs and help them face their challenges without assigning blame. Because assigning blame does no one any good. And you cannot help educate and you cannot help support residents without considering the welfare of each and every one. No one will be receptive to education and understanding without feeling that their own personal needs and rights have been well regarded.
Betty, what are you doing in here? This is not your room. Betty, I don't want you touching my things. Betty, look what you did. Everything is a mess. Betty, I mean it. Please get out of my room.
Good evening, Ellen. Betty, what are you doing in here?
I'm sick and tired of people coming in my room. I want a lock on my door so that Betty and everybody else can't come in here.
Ellen, you know we don't have locks on our doors for safety reasons. And Betty, you know you're not supposed to be in here. So come on, let's go to your room. Good evening, Ellen. Oh, hello, Betty.
I'm sick and tired of people coming into my room. I want a lock on my door so that Betty and everyone else can't come in here.
Ellen, I'm sorry this happened. I know it's upsetting, but we can't keep locks on our doors for safety reasons. Now I'm going to take Betty to her room, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about what we can do to help you keep your privacy. And also I'll send someone in throughout the night to check on you. Okay? Come on, Betty. Let's go to your room. And we can look at pictures. Ellen, I'll be right back.
Staff need to look carefully at the impact of a scenario like this on the other resident. It's very easy and often common for staff to do an intervention, namely to redirect the resident who's wandering, and not to follow up with the person who has been affected by it. And I think staff really ought to ask in each case how the person's feeling about it, if they feel all right about it. I think the key issue here is that residents themselves don't entirely understand the issue of cognitive impairment. If you look at the impact on the cognitively unimpaired resident or relatively unimpaired resident, it can create for that person a climate of fear, uncertainty, of unpredictability. And that's not something that most or probably all nursing home residents appreciate. That is, their personal space, in a sense, is necessarily being violated because they're in group quarters, etc. And so what space they have becomes extraordinarily important to them.
The staff should really be in tune to the residents' behavior. The first thing they should do is to approach both of the residents and to try to get them apart and comfort them and to find out what exactly is going on with this situation, who the aggressor is. And the next thing they should do is report it to the nurse in charge. And the main thing is to intercept before anything escalates. It's important to report the incident because we need to document any type of unusual behavior. And sometimes this may not even be unusual behavior. That's why they're on a special care neighborhood. But we need to be accountable for the residents' behavior. We need to make sure if the resident is on psych meds, we need to make sure the psych meds are effective and we need to ensure the residents' safety. This can help the staff anticipate what might happen in the future. Sometimes we take this information and as a team we decide perhaps the resident needs a single room, perhaps the resident needs another neighborhood, a smaller neighborhood.
It's very important for staff in a situation like that to look for patterns of behavior and to understand specifically what's happening to that resident. Are they bored? You know, is there a pain problem? Is there some issue which is causing this sort of wandering behavior? There are programs that are based on good scientific evidence to help staff work with residents and reduce those kinds of common but very disruptive behaviors. I think sometimes that one of the most difficult things for staff, and for me when I do work in nursing homes, even though we all know that patients with dementia, that residents with dementia aren't doing what they do on purpose, it requires continually reminding oneself of that fact and looking for other kinds of solutions than being punitive or trying to extensively reason with someone.
We've seen how resident-to-resident elder mistreatment can be a serious problem. It's often difficult to manage. In this video, we've looked at 3 types of mistreatment: physical, verbal, and psychological. There are other types that were not covered in the video, such as unwanted sexual advances. You've probably seen mistreatment by residents aimed at other residents. You may not have recognized the behaviors as mistreatment, or if you did recognize it, you may not have known how best to intervene to lessen the impact. This type of mistreatment can have serious physical and emotional effects on residents. But remember, with careful planning and action, these behaviors can be prevented or lessened. Let's review the steps you can take to manage and curb resident-to-resident.
You know, it's been in the news lately, the term Obamacare, right? It's gone to the Supreme Court to see if it's legal or not, or constitutional. Okay. The actual name of the Obamacare Act is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010, or PPACA. And there's a section in there, section 6703B3, that has to do with all of us. Well, those of us who work in the nursing home. Some of you work elsewhere, so I suppose doesn't apply to you. But we all have an obligation that if we see a crime being committed against a person in a nursing home, we all, as employees, have an obligation. Actually, it does affect all of you if you come into this building for whatever reason. Because if you see a crime or hear about a crime in a facility, you have an obligation to report it to law enforcement. That's a new thing, not just to the Department of Health, but law enforcement. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. So here's the requirements of the facility. We have to notify covered individuals of their reporting obligations. You are covered individuals. I'm notifying you of your obligations to report. We have to post a conspicuous notice of your rights and responsibilities and the information on where to file complaints. And throughout our building on the big bulletin boards, you're going to see this notice. And it tells you who to call, the sheriff's office, Department of Health, talks about the time requirements, which we're going to get into. But I just wanted to show you that form so you know what it looks like. We may not, as a facility, retaliate against anyone who lawfully reports reasonable suspicion of a crime. Now again, we'd like you to follow the same kind of rule of thumb. Tell the supervisor, tell the administrator, and we'll all call law enforcement together. Okay? But if we don't, you still have the obligation to call law enforcement if you really believe that a crime has been committed. Another requirement is we have to coordinate with law enforcement. I went to the sheriff's office back last year when this came out and sat down and talked to them. They didn't know about this law, and so we had to inform them of it. Even the Jamestown Police Department didn't ever hear about it either. Review adherence to existing CMS policies. I'm not really sure what that means. I have to read that again, but basically reviewing our policies to make sure we're following what these requirements are of the law. And we had to develop policies and procedures. They too, I believe, are in that gray book and in the, I believe, in the nursing manual. Covered individuals, that's all of you. Anyone who is an owner, operator, employee, manager, agent, or contractor of the facility. Last year I sent out to all of our vendors who come into this building a notification that they are also required under this law and sent them a copy of that form. Here's who you call if you see a crime being committed while you're in our nursing home. So all individuals who become aware of a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. So remember last year, my little example, the cooties? Remember? You're sitting in the butt hut and someone says, oh, do you know what happened to so-and-so? Blah, 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 blah. You now have the cooties. You have the same obligation to report. Even though you didn't see it, you heard about it. You have to report it as well. So really, the whole herd of you should be coming and telling me about it so that we can call law enforcement. Okay, the time requirement. If there's serious bodily injury, defined as injury involving extreme pain, risk of death, protracted loss, impairment of function, bodily member, organ, also included under this would be criminal sexual abuse. Or neglect, defined as a failure of a caregiver to provide goods or services necessary to maintain health, safety of an elder, or self-neglect. I don't know what self-neglect means, but, and all other situations that we believe are crimes, we have to report within 24 hours. What happens if we don't report? You could be subject to a civil monetary penalty of not more than $200,000. You got $200,000 you're ready to part with? Needs to be reported. Increased harm, right here. What that means is if you fail to report a problem, like somebody's abusing residents, and you know about it, hear about it, see it, and you don't tell anybody, and then they go and hurt somebody else, now it goes up to $300,000 because you could have stopped it the first time. Okay, so that's what that means. Penalties for retaliation. If you call in a report, we wish you'd tell us so we know about it, but if you didn't, and you do your obligation and you report what you thought was a crime, we can't retaliate against you. If we do, we get fined $200,000, up to $200,000, and we could be excluded from the Medicare and Medicaid program for up to 2 years. You know what that means? Might as well close our doors because we won't get paid for 2 years. So what is a crime? This is always the hard part. Nobody really could tell me, except that crimes are felonies and misdemeanors, not violations. Like traffic violations wouldn't be crimes. And it really, the only definitions that I could find have to do with how long you were in prison. But there was a list of about 35 crimes, and I just pulled out of that just for the sake of time for today, some that could be occurring in the nursing home, like assault, sex offenses, criminal mischief, robbery, healthcare fraud, criminal diversion of prescription medications and prescriptions. Everybody read paper last week? Heritage Green, nurse took a prescription, was writing prescriptions for themselves. Big trouble. Crime. I'm pretty sure they reported that, I think. I can't remember how it all went down, but it was in the paper finally this week. Okay, that's done. Now, oops, nope. Okay. Now, what I'm going to share is our first instance of calling law enforcement, which happened recently. And if you know of this situation or of these people, I hope I can try to be as anonymous about this as possible. If you were involved, I want to say everybody did the right thing. And when I talk about could we have done better, it's not any kind of a slam to anybody who was involved in this. So I really want this, even though I'm on film, all you people that are watching this on film, this applies to you too. I mean, this is not to be spread all over the world, but it does show that bad things can happen in nursing homes. And that's why we all have this obligation. Okay, and I'm going to try to be I'm going to soft pedal it as much as I can. It's as bad and as gross as it was. But here's the situation. We had a resident with dementia who had a visitor that would come frequently, and visit the resident. And one day, we're all caring about our business, and the bathroom bell was ringing. An aide went down to the bathroom, to the room. The door was locked. It was odd. Why is the door locked? I don't even know why we have locks on the doors, because you can open it from the outside. So they knocked on the door, and oh, by the way, time out. Scene 3. Did anybody pick up something else that was wrong with scene 3 when the resident came in the room and was fiddling with the person's stuff?
She didn't knock before she entered.
Yes, she didn't knock. So no wonder the resident's upset. Everybody just comes in here whenever they want. I'm surprised they let that get on film and spread it out to the world, because that's a dignity right? To knock on the door before you go in a resident's room. No wonder she was upset. Everybody just comes in a room. Okay, back to our story. The aide, doing their job, their level best, goes and opens up the door, and what does she find? She's aghast. There's a little bit of sexual activity going on in the bathroom. She left the room, a little bit in shock, goes and gets a supervisor, tells what happened. They go down. Everything's back to normal. Call bell light happened to be still off or on, turned it off. They come and get me. Person's gone. And so I hear about what happens. What do you think? Crime? Some people shaking their heads.
Then I have to ask the resident, is it consensual?
Resident does not have capacity, already proven in a court of law, has a guardian for decision making and for finances.
It's a crime.
It's a crime. Person didn't have the capacity to decide. I mean, sort of did, sort of didn't, sort of did, sort of didn't. Can't remember even that the guy was there. 1 hour later, doesn't even remember. I didn't have any visitors. Did I? Okay, so we gather up our investigation, we gather up our stories, we get written statements, we try to go and see and look and see. I call the sheriff within, 2 hours. I think I called within an hour. They did a good job. They showed up, took all our stories, took all our information, looked around. I thought, we all did the right thing. Guess what happened in the end? Huh? Nothing. Okay. You know why? Okay. We could have done just a little bit better. And again, I'm still questioning, it seems so illogical to me that nothing was done, because all the stories and things don't match up to reality. And I think and this was, right at the time Penn State was in the news. I mean, come on. Any jury would hear this story would go with, making something happen here. Okay. One thing we could have maybe done better, and again, please understand, the people involved did nothing wrong. I'm just saying how we could do better. And the reason I even decided to bring this up just so you know that it happens. It can happen. And get it in our heads as much as we can. What can we do differently? How can we prepare our minds for an event like this? Because the shock value is like, you know, you walk in on somebody, I mean, kind of embarrassing, you kind of leave, you know, you're not really sure what to do. And again, I probably would have done the same thing. I'm sure I would have done the same thing. Oh, sorry. Shut the door and go tell somebody. But what's the first rule? Intervene. Okay? How could intervention, what could we have done there? I know it's gross and I know it's scary, but what can we do? Stick your foot in the door, say, what are you doing? What's going on here? Nurse, you saw it in the film, nurse, help, somebody come, somebody. Because you know what, in the end, what's that? What's that? Code blue. Okay, well, in the end, again, because this person lacked capacity, they're not a credible witness. So we have one person's word against another person's word. What we saw, didn't see, you know, there's a lot of little minutia factors that just blow my mind why that matters. But I guess to make it stick up in court, they have to be real precise. So again, getting another witness in there could have helped to have now two people saw this happening. It's not just one person's word against another person's word. And again, please, this is not a fault at all on anybody. It's just, you know, how do we prepare ourselves for something that you would never expect in a minute? I mean, I've been doing this for 30 plus years. I mean, I've never ever experienced anything like that. I mean, I'm sure none of you have. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced some pretty weird stuff. Right, David? But that's pretty much at the top of my list. Okay? So our time is up. Any questions? Please, I gave that example to just teach us something, what we could do better, maybe being a little more sensitive to our residents in particular that are cognitively impaired, can't make decisions for them, don't really know what's going on, be a little more aware, a little more alert, you know. I mean, I look back on situations that I remember dealing with this couple that knew each other for years, you know. It's like they were good friends, and it's like, you know, you don't think about it. And I look back to examples where I should have been able to read the signs here. Something wasn't quite right here, you know. So, and it's luck of the draw. I mean, if the bathroom bell hadn't accidentally been tripped, because it doesn't ring in the room, they'd have never known. Somehow, in whatever was going on, the bathroom bell got pulled. Yes?
How are you going to protect that resident? Are you going to keep that person? Do you have to let that
I had a letter prepared before the sheriff left, sheriff's investigator, to say you're not welcome in the facility anymore, send it out certified mail. That was reinforced by the sheriff when they went and met with him, and said if he did show up, he'd be, police would be called to be arrested for trespassing, at least. Person's no longer here, by the way, just so everybody knows. So, any questions? Again, I please just, you know, that's not a story to be spread around the world. I mean, it's just not. We did our job to the best of our ability, and sadly, the outcome wasn't what any of us should have thought it would be, but it is what it is. At least we're not getting fined $200,000. So, any other questions? What do we do first? Intervene. What do we do second? To whom? Nursing supervisor.